So yes, free pattern, and I think a main lesson if you look at history, and I think it's always great to look back at the past to see also how things kind of repeat themselves, or we can see the same pattern, is first, you have a very strong elite opposition to democracy. If you look at the text about, for example, the Swiss movement for direct democracy, it's very close to what we hear currently in France, where there is a strong demand for direct democracy. It's the fear of the people. People will make bad decisions, they are not educated enough, and this is what we've seen repeatedly when it was about getting new rights. So it was the same argument about the women's suffrage, that they cannot vote because they are not educated enough, they are not ready enough to do that. It was the case also in Switzerland. The second mechanism we found is the one getting the referendum through election. So because you have a political party fighting for it. And this was the case in the US, interestingly. If you look at the map of the US, and it's a pity I didn't bring one, in the eastern part of the country, so half of the eastern part, you don't have direct democracy. But initially, when at the start of the Confederation, these states had some form of what they called the town meetings, but it was the form of direct democracy at the local level. They lost it when they joined the Union, whereas on the western part, they get it thanks to the Progressive Party, because the Progressive Party put it very strongly in the agenda at a period where, when you had to join the Union, you had to hold a referendum. So California had to hold a referendum to join the Union. So people had to vote, and a way of protecting their right was to include referendum at the regional level, so in the state constitution. And so we think this explains why the western part of the US has direct democratic procedures, whereas the eastern part lost it. And the last part, the last mechanism is getting a referendum through elites. And this is what Chang-Ling presented for the Eastern European country. But interestingly, when you have a democratization pattern as it took place in the US, in Italy, in Germany after the World War II, these mechanisms are very, very limited. Very hard to activate. They are more of a, political kind of gadget within the constitution. It's more agenda-setting referendum, initiative and referendum to abrogate, repeal a law, but it's not the full, really, the tool that you could use to also change the constitution. Another thing that perhaps a lesson is that political systems with enabling a lot of parties, so you can have a lot of parties and a lot of representation in the parliament with very small parties, you have a higher chance of getting the referendum. Why? Because it's a tool of the loser. And if you look at how direct democracy was defended in the past, it was by people, parties and ideology who lost power, because when you lose power, you don't want to lose everything, so you want to keep a bit of control of the political process. So when you have a system that is with two main parties that alternate in power, it's very unlikely that you will have at the national level a form of direct democracy, because the winners tend to win it all, and when they are in power, they say like, okay, I'm gonna implement my program. And then the third perhaps lesson is, I think there is a thin line, and we discuss it over the past 2 days, between experiencing direct democracy procedures and being locked in a mechanism that is not functioning. And that could create a lot of disillusion and disappointment. Because, so if you, I don't know if you are, I'm following a lot the debate in France, not only because I'm French, but also because this is really one of the first time where we see the same movement that took place in Switzerland. It's my opinion, at least, in the past, defending really direct democracy. A tendency is to say we will create a tool that is not risky at all. So we will put very big threshold, very big quorum, and we will make sure to convince the one who are not convinced. The problem and the pitfall of this is the fact that you will get a mechanism that is so hard to use, and you can't really use it. You can't change really things that people will feel like, okay, this mechanism is not working at all, and there is a lack of trust and a huge disillusion. So I think if you look at the past, I would say the best way to go, or the next things to ask in Taiwan would be to have a constitutional referendum, so the capacity to change the constitution, because this is really where you could have the more impact also on the political process.
I will talk about the Swiss experience and the development of the direct democratic tools in Switzerland. Our topic is from west to east, and Switzerland can be seen as a chain in this development. Many see Switzerland as the champion of direct democracy and expect that also Switzerland invented direct democracy. I think that's not really true, because Switzerland was also influenced mainly by the French Revolution. Maybe there are also a homegrown concept as Landsgemeinde, so communities meeting on squares and voting about everything since 100 years ago, but it's a little bit disputed how big this influence was in Switzerland. So, yeah, Switzerland is, as already mentioned, a chain, a part of this chain, and influenced afterwards other countries like Uruguay or also different states, different US states. So now I will a little bit elaborate about instruments in Switzerland. As you might know, we have different instruments of direct democracy, as the initiative, the referendum, but we did not have this immediately. It was developed step by step. So one of the first instruments on federal level since Switzerland was founded 1848 was the mandatory referendum for constitutional amendments. So this was already quite good. So that means like when the parliament wanted to change the constitution, they had first to ask the people. And in addition, also there had to be a double majority, so also the cantons had to agree on. And later on, a second tool or instrument of direct democracy was introduced in 1874. There was the referendum on laws. So this exists until today. So every law made by the parliament can be opposed by 50,000 people, and then this law has to put on the ballot, and then the people can decide if this law will be ever activated or not. So it was 1874, and then the next big step was 1891 when the popular initiative was introduced. So popular initiative, we have different forms. One form is the partial initiatives. That means you can either change a concrete clause of the constitution, or you can initiate general proposal. You can ask for a general proposal, and then the parliament will decide how they implement this idea or topic. And we also have referendums on other issues, for example, about when Switzerland would join a supranational organization like the EU. The constitution says we have to hold a ballot about this if Switzerland joins the EU or also NATO. So to come to an end, to my part, often the initiative in Switzerland is seen as an innovator. So you can table a certain policy which is not for sure implemented already by the parliament. So otherwise you would not need the initiative. And the referendum is often seen as a break to government policy when the people does not like a certain government policy, like for example here you had the nuclear referendum about nuclear energy, and then it can be abolished. Yes. Yeah. So now I give over to Uwe. Maybe he can talk more about Switzerland or.
Yes, hello everybody. So this is a very general, wide topic we are debating here today in this panel. I will try to somehow draw a picture of direct democracy by going from west to east, but also to travel in time. So at the same time I try to go from past to future, and I plan to do this by discussing three spotlights of direct democracy I find particularly interesting, and the three examples come from Switzerland, Japan, and the Netherlands. And I want to look in particular at practice, so what actually happens. So less about the institutional design, so I want to look more at what really happened. So for me, these three cases, they represent three first moments of direct democracy. So in every democracy, you have these first moments when right after the evolution, everyone or a large part of the population is so active in politics or defining this democracy that in the literature you can call them, they're also called first moments of democracy. Typically, I already said it, a large part of the population then discusses, lots of debate is involved, and then gradually, of course, it slows down and becomes normal. The first moment of direct democracy is a case in Switzerland dating back from 1831. So very early. Modern Switzerland did not even exist yet. So 1831. But as was mentioned before, these ideas of the French Revolution, they were circulated not with internet, but with pamphlets and leaflets. You would say flyers these days. So people passed on these ideas of the French Revolution. At that time, it was not even good to mention that these ideas come from the French Revolution, because French Revolution was bloody, and so it was better to somehow put them in disguise. But one of these ideas, the French Revolution, led to the introduction of the so-called veto in the canton of St. Gallen, in the first constitution of St. Gallen in 1831. And it was reinforced by the people themselves. So people from the countryside actually mobilized against the center. This was a frequent conflict in Switzerland. There were other divides, but the frequent conflict was like people from the countryside, more farmer-oriented, against urban, where power usually resided. So 600 men carrying sticks, so quite physically reinforced, marched up in St. Gallen in front of Parliament, where they were debating how to draw up this constitution. And they, with their sticks, making noise, it was like close to violence, but did not really break out. They reinforced the introduction of this veto right. So what is the veto right? And you can say this is an embryonic form of the referendum we have these days. So to trigger this veto right, which ended up in the Constitution of St. Gallen, 50 citizens in a first step have to mobilize and ask for a citizen assembly, but this has to happen in each municipality of the canton. So in parallel, in each municipality, 50 people at least have to mobilize. Again, no internet, no telephone, so you had to mobilize 50 people in each municipality to call for a citizen assembly. That's already quite a big task. In addition to that, then when they voted by show of hands, you needed a majority of all citizens against this new law to veto the law. So in all the municipalities, mobilize first citizen assembly. In the citizen assembly, a majority of all citizens, only male of course at that time, had to everyone, all male citizens from this municipality, the majority had to be in favor of blocking the law in all municipalities, and all that in 45 days. So you would say very difficult to do, but for me this was one of these first moments of direct democratic history. Only in one canton only, St. Gallen. Yes, but the idea was there then, you know, so yes. But the idea was there, and then let's look a bit at the figures. So in 30 years from 1831 to 1861, 194 laws were passed. So this is a total number, let's say 200 laws were passed in 30 years. And for 40, there was a veto movement. So 20% of the laws they tried to veto. But because of these difficult conditions to fulfill the requirements, only 4 veto made it to the vote. So only 4 out of 200, so only 2%. But still, it was a beginning, the idea was there, and from then on the idea traveled. So that was first moment of direct democracy, Switzerland. Then want to move to Japan. Japan, we heard it this morning in the panel, direct democracy is not binding, and the municipality, and it only, well, it mainly, you can change the constitution, but that needs like 2/3 parliamentary majority and then referendum votes. It's difficult to achieve. But you have quite active direct democracy on the local level, despite the fact that it's not binding, especially again in one of these first moments of democracy right after the war. Right after the war, a law on direct democracy on the local level entered the legal framework, and it allows not to vote on issues but to recall the mayor, the parliament, or a member of parliament. So this was a kind of transformed continuation of what already existed before the war, but before the war the ministry decided whether these people would be recalled. This simply the same provision that was in the power of the ministry was just given to the people, probably also under pressure, slight pressure of the US at that time. So we have this new provision that allows you to recall mayors or assemblies, and let's look again at practice during this first moment in history of direct democracy in Japan after World War II. From 1947 until 1960, we have assembled with my Japanese colleague Mitsuhiko Okamoto, we have established all the numbers. So attempts to recall mayor or assembly, 700. It's quite a lot. So there's more than 3,000 municipalities in Japan, but more than 700 attempts is quite a lot. Then votes, 170, so that made it to a vote. That's again around 24%. And then actually recalled mayors or assembly, roughly 100. So it's not a dead letter. It really, and they weeded out like still very nationalistic or corrupt politicians were weeded out through practice of recall in this first moment of democracy. So in Japan, worked quite well also. It's still practiced, but not in such extreme numbers today. Then jumping to my third and last case, which is the Netherlands, also jumping to the future. So in the Netherlands, there's this interesting referendum that took place 6th of April 2016, referendum against the association agreement EU-Ukraine. Don't go into the detail of that, but the interesting part here was that signatures were collected mostly digital. So more than 90% of signatures were collected digital. And let's just have a look at the numbers that you can collect digitally in what time frame. It's quite impressive, I think. And again, for me, this is a first moment of direct democracy, but a first moment of direct democracy in the Netherlands of the modern world. This is pointing to what we are facing in direct democracy in the future, I think. So, first 24 hours to collect the signatures. You have 6 weeks to collect 300,000 signatures. First 24 hours, 30,000 signatures already collected. First week, 80,000 signatures collected. First 1 month, 240,000 signatures collected. Still not enough to make the threshold of 300,000. Again, massive mobilization digitally. In the last 2-3 days, an additional 150,000. So total number of signatures in 6 weeks, 451, 666. Quite a lot of signatures. And this tells you how powerful the internet can be in the future. Once this step is made to go digital for signature collection, we have to think again what direct democracy should, or how direct democracy should look like. Right now in most countries, of course, we want to lower the thresholds and push for more direct democracy, which is absolutely fine for most countries. But in Switzerland at the moment we already have a lot of votes, 3-4 times a year on several issues, on all the state levels, in addition to elections. So how will direct democracy look like once we have e-collecting, so digital signature collection? I would predict that almost every threshold has no meaning anymore. And in the Netherlands, also quite typical, politicians immediately asked for to double the signature requirement, so to move it up from 300,000 to 600,000. And then, okay, the procedure was scrapped anyway, so they don't have this tool anymore. And I will stop here because we need time for discussion as well, but this was just my idea to go through first moments of direct democracy worldwide and open the question for how should it look in the future. Thank you.